so excited to have you here today, and I want to tell the audience that we're going to have some questions, but please start thinking of things that you might want to ask him, because we'll have some time towards the end for questions from you all. Okay? Does that sound good?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, great. Let's sort of start with chasing life, because it's a way that you're, I think, trying to help us understand not only longevity, but happiness, like how to live longer and happier, and what you're learning from people who live around the world in different places and in different ways. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, the themes that you're seeing.
Sure. Let me just say, first of all, thank you for having me here. I've been here the entire time. I'm just delighted. It's funny, during the pandemic, I kind of realized something. I've never been a super social person. I think, a decade of neurosurgery training and just head down for so long, that wasn't something that I thought a lot about. I thought being social was something that was a privilege, something that was a luxury. But then I missed it a lot during the pandemic. So coming here and spending time with people, it's really, it's great, and it's also very necessary. So thank you for that. Chasing Life was basically built on this simple premise that there are things happening in the world that lead to people having better, happier, healthier lives. We don't always know what they are. We don't always know how to apply those things. As a journalist, as someone who investigates these things, I wanted to travel the world and find those places, learn about those lifestyles, and try and bring some of those lessons back. And as you say, there's a lot of correlations between health and happiness, no surprise. But I think there were some real insights as well. I'll give you a quick example. I had read this tiny little blurb in one of the medical journals, The Lancet, about this group of people who were considered the healthiest people in the world, which was interesting to me. That got my attention. And it turns out it's this indigenous tribe living in the Amazon rainforest near Bolivia. Now, people immediately think, well, you're an indigenous tribe, of course you're going to be healthy. Actually, not necessarily true. Most known populations of people anywhere in the world now deal with the same chronic diseases that we think about here in the United States. So I decided to go live with them for a while and just understand what their lives were like. How did they move? Turns out they move, but not intensely. They walk a lot. They don't run. How do they eat? People think a paleo diet. Well, the healthiest people in the world actually eat 70% carbs because they farm a lot. If you're a hunter-gatherer, you have to count on farmed food. They intermittently fast because sometimes there's not enough food. They fast not because it's fashionable, but because they have to. And they sleep a lot. Turns out if you don't have a device to stare at, you sleep pretty well. About 9.5 hours a night is what they were sleeping. I thought that was it was interesting because I think we have all these notions of what the human body, sort of what the ideal way to live is. And it can be very different when you start to actually explore. I'll tell you one other quick thing. If you live in the rainforest, you spend most of your life probably cohabitating with a parasite of some sort in your body. You live with parasites. And you get sick when you're young, and then these parasites are living inside your body. It could be that our immune system was sort of designed to cohabitate with the parasite. So many of these chronic diseases are either ignited or exacerbated by our own immune systems.
Are you prescribing tape?
I don't think that everyone should get a parasitic infection.
Filariasis for all around?
No. No hookworm to go around. But we spend $4 trillion on healthcare in this country. We spend $1 billion a day on heart disease alone. And there are places that don't even have a healthcare system, and they don't have the diseases that we're spending, so much money trying to beat back. I don't want to overly simplify, but I think there's some real lessons there, and I'm lucky to be able to go out and find them.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that you say all the time are about how important it is just to do things in moderation, and that sometimes it's just really about life, not just lifestyle, but the way that you live, how you are across the journey. There's not a moment in time or a thing that you change. I think that's very thematic in the way that you, hopefully probably doctored, and also the way that you talk to the public. Which sort of brings me to the flip side, which is there are ways for us to think about chasing life that we can emulate to live longer and healthier and happier. But the reality in America is the opposite on a population level, right? So what we're seeing in the U.S. is that life expectancy has been declining We had 1 year where it blipped up and then it started to decline again, and there's pretty significant disparities in how it declined based on the color of your skin or your income. And you've written about this, and you did an HBO documentary about it, essentially the deaths of despair.
Yes.
I'd like for you to share with them this other idea about what's happening in America. Why is it that in the richest country in the world, we actually have declining life expectancy? What are the stressors and other causes of that?
Yeah, I mean, since World War II, every developed country in the world has been increasing steadily in life expectancy, some faster than others. And that was true in the United States as well up until about 7, 8 years ago, pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And now we're the only developed country in the world where life expectancy is dropping, which is, again, we spend $4 trillion a year.
I'm curious, are you guys aware of that? Raise your hand if you knew that. Yeah, it's shocking to me, actually, that a lot of people don't really understand the pickle that we're in.
And it's interesting because we've really advanced in so many areas, taking care of tertiary care problems, advanced cancers. Top 3 causes of premature death, driving these deaths of despair, were overdoses, typically opioids, suicides, and liver cirrhosis, typically due to alcoholism. And that's why they're called the deaths of despair. And what was interesting, if you look at break it down even further within the country, and we traveled all over the country basically talking to people in various towns across this country, but also seeing what was happening in other countries, you find that it was primarily the white working class that was actually most affected by these deaths of despair. African American life expectancy is lower than working white, but it's been going up. Hispanics is actually the highest in this country. So we're talking about the white working class predominantly. And, Karen, I mean, I think there's all sorts of reasons to sort of point at to try and figure out why that is. It's not easy, but it's pretty clear that, we're talking about sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters of the greatest generation. I think there was a sense of people that they were going to inherit the earth, inherit the United States, certainly at a minimum. And instead, you see this population dying at a faster rate than any cohort in the developed world, which is kind of remarkable. It's addressable. I mean, that's the inspiring part. I think now that it's been sort of found and we understand it better, I think there's things we can do. But it's been pretty tragic.
One of some of this work, I know you're familiar with, is Andy Case and Angus Deaton, the economists,
right,
that wrote a lot about this. And some of it, for me as a physician, was a realization that it wasn't just the cirrhosis. There was actually a throughput, an input to that had a lot to do with hopelessness and helplessness, as you describe. And these are the social determinants of health. It's the things you're talking about, lack of access to economic opportunity and education. And it requires more than a scalpel, more than a stethoscope in my case, to be able to help folks. And I think this is one of the things that hopefully you can share a little bit of your thinking in how public health is what we do as a society, and not which is different than medicine. And I think this is something you vocalize really well, like how important it is for all of us to work together.
Well, when we talk about equity with regard to public health, regard to healthcare overall, I think people have different notions of what that means. I think for a long time it's been focused on access, which is a very important thing. I mean, that was what the Affordable Care Act really targeted most. But I think it's pretty clear that there are people who have outstanding access to healthcare who are still wildly unhealthy. These two things don't necessarily correlate. What I was really struck by, and we talked to primatologists and sociologists and physicians on the front line, was that what is the overall impact of living in a society that doesn't have equity? Like, how do you measure that? There was this one primatologist who basically did this experiment, for example, with Capuchin monkeys. And the Capuchin monkeys are the really smart monkeys, the organ grinder monkeys in the movies. They had 2 of them sitting next to each other in 2 glass cages. They could see each other. They could see the examiner. And the experiment was essentially, one monkey was to do a task and for that get a reward. They would hand a pebble to the examiner and they'd get a piece of cucumber. They did this 25 times in a row and perfectly happy to do it. Then they went to the other monkey, started doing the same experiment, except now they got a piece of grape, a more desirable treat. Now, what do you think happens? Well, the monkey on the left is seeing this, and starts to get a little upset. And they're measuring, stress hormone levels. They do it again with the monkey on the left. Again, give a piece of cucumber. Monkey sees the cucumber, throws it back at the examiner. It's very upsetting. They keep doing this, and the monkey on the left is very stressed, but the point of the experiment was that the monkey on the right was also very stressed. Cortisol levels shot up, hemodynamics, blood pressure, heart rate shot up as well. So just the idea, whether you are in the haves or the have-nots, whether you, in this case, have access to something versus not, it's stressful. It's just stressful living in that sort of society. And I thought that was a really important lesson when we look at healthcare overall. Yes, access, but there's many components to equity when it comes to public health.
And the wider the disparities, the worse everyone's health is, I think.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Exactly
No
right.
matter where you are.
And the more the stress is. All right. We have about 13 minutes left, so start thinking of your questions in case we can get to them in the last few minutes. I want to shift gears, though, away from big picture societal things like education and stress to thinking about, well, where is the state of the science in brain health, in longevity? What are the things that you want to make sure you're sharing with us that's sort of exciting in that space?
The thing that excited me the most, I think, over the past few years with brain health was basically abandoning a long-taught principle that I was taught, I'm sure you were taught in medical school as well, which basically is that, you get given a certain number of brain cells, and that's it. Yeah. You drain the cash over your life, and things like alcohol, they may accelerate that drainage. But we know now over the past several years that that's not the case, that we can continue to grow new brain cells at any age. I mean, that was a really revelatory thing, certainly in the world of neuroscience. And then the question became, obviously, if that was the case, if you can grow new brain cells and that it's not preordained that you're going to lose your memory, you're going to lose your cognition, your judgment, all those things, then how do you do that? Like, what are the most effective strategies? And it's clear that there are societies around the world where people, they live cognitively totally intact until their dying day. I mean, it's not this gradual deterioration that we expect. And I think that's what has fascinated me the most, that if we believe this, we talk so much about treating things like Alzheimer's, dementia, treating some of these other neurodegenerative diseases, but so much of that, I think, is based on this preordained belief that that's just going to be the way that it is. I'll give you just a couple of examples. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And you don't need to remember that name, but basically it's like the miracle grow for the brain. And if you are somebody who is persistently active, and again, not necessarily intensely active, but just active, you are making BDNF continuously. In fact, they found that people who were briskly walking versus running made more BDNF, and that's because when you run, when you're intensely active, you're also making a lot of cortisol,
right,
and that can suppress the BDNF. So if you want to do something good for your heart, you may intensely be active, but if you want to do something good for your brain, it's more about moderate activity. Or even just diet. What's interesting is we all know that we take in probably more calories than we should. But what is fascinating about the brain is that when you take in a lot of sugar into the body's going to store that as fat, as energy for a rainy day. That's not the way the brain works. As soon as you raise glucose levels beyond a certain amount, the receptors basically just shut down. So you could be overfeeding your body and starving your brain at the exact same time, which again is a little bit counterintuitive to how people think about these things. So it is, the idea that we can change our brains throughout our lives, that it's not preordained, and that there are pretty simple ways to do it, that people are doing in many places around the world already, I think was really inspiring to me.
You have a gazillion suggestions about this about these in the book, and one of the things you and I were talking about the science some more yesterday, and I think you're right. There's some exciting opportunities for more magic bullet, if you will. But you also say a thing we were talking about yesterday, which is what's the best thing that you can actually do for your brain? Is it buy a supplement or buy running shoes? Is actually what you said.
Be active. It's what's so interesting is that I go see these things around the world, and then I come back and talk to the scientists about the merits of it. So, for example, when I was in Bolivia, you barely saw anybody sitting. Nobody sat.
We should probably tell them all to stand up.
Right, I know.
It's starting to feel
But the
bad.
idea that why is people say sitting is the new smoking, and it's a cute phrase, but what you find, and this is so interesting, is that right now our bodies are continuously fighting off external attacks, mutated cells, pathogens. It's a constant battle that our bodies are fighting. When we sit a lot, we tend to turn off the perimeter defense systems, if you will. It's almost like saying, hey, look, it's time. My life is coming to an end. So it's like, so as you're all sitting, I apologize for that, but it's so interesting to just think about that, a body in motion, what that is doing in terms of all these downstream effects, BDNF, turning on the perimeter defense systems, all that's really interesting.
It is, I think you're describing very well that it's everything in moderation, that it's, eating well, being active, resting, being socially connected. These are just many thematic things actually I've heard here at the conference. And people often want to just know, is there a pill that I can take? So as an internist, I very much appreciate a surgeon encouraging people that there's not just one solution. So I want to move to this last piece, which is just why do people trust Sanjay Gupta? You're sitting here telling us things that we just believe, and in a time that most people don't know what to believe with respect to institutions or individuals. Just tell us a little bit about how you thought about this in the pandemic, sort of how you're thinking about it going forward, and then
Man, I tell
we'll
you,
get to a question in just a minute.
This is it's a huge topic, and I think it has real relevance beyond just medicine and health. In terms of trust, one thing, I've been doing this a long time. I do think that having some of that longevity does help. But what really strikes me is that we live in a probabilistic world. During the pandemic, I read Critique of Pure Reason again by Kant. Shows you how bored I was at times.
Rebecca was very excited.
That's right. And one of the things that Kant says, and this is a book written in the 1800s, he says that his greatest fear is that we will have false confidence that comes from a ignorance of the probabilistic nature of the world, that we always want to see black and white where we should rightly see gray. This desire for certainty in an uncertain world. I think that if you understand that, I think it really helps towards building trust. Because there's times, Karen, as a doc, when I'm talking to a patient, and the right answer is I don't know. And when I've said that on television or as part of a report, sometimes it's a little scary because you want to be the person who knows. You want to be the person who has those answers. But when you say you don't know, honestly, authentically, I think it goes a long way. There's a vulnerability about it, an authenticity about it that I think is really important. And it pays homage to this idea that we do live in an uncertain world. So, like during the pandemic, there's lots of times when you say, we don't know. We're dealing with something novel, new, which is something, again, most humans don't really like. When is the last time you experienced something for the first time? Doesn't happen very much as an adult. For kids, it happens quite a bit, but not as an adult. So to be able to say, look, we don't know, but, we're going to err on the side of caution here, just like you would with a patient in your office. I'm not going to accelerate around the blind turn here. I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit to see what's over there. Mm-hmm. I think that those things do help. There's a lot of suspicion out there, and you know what? I would say some of it is warranted. Some of the, there's a difference between suspicion, skepticism, cynicism. People who are suspicious, for example, during the pandemic of things like the vaccines, some people were just shit starters, chaos creators. But there's other people whose antennas are just raised really high.
Yeah.
They're raised really high. And if your antenna's raised really high, yes, you are going to see threats that don't exist. But sometimes you're going to see threats that everyone else misses as well. So I think, painting with one brush people who would not take a vaccine or whatever, I think was a little dangerous because people really came at this from all sorts of different ways. And most people, not everyone, most people, with I think a true desire to do the right thing, for themselves and for their loved ones. So I think, that was a lesson that I think I was able to bring from medicine into journalism.
Well, listen, Sanjay, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
being here. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you all so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks.